Hi guys, this is the call. We normally have Mike Stewart doing the introduction. In this instance, I'm doing it myself because Mike's had to pick his wife up from the airport. So I just wanted to sort of reset in terms of why this call was set up in the first place. This call was set up because, frankly, we're quite concerned, and actually the implications of the crisis that we face is an extraordinary situation. Furthermore, the style of what we do is to check this from every possible angle. So mainly from my network, I've invited a lot of the leading thinkers from Lord Glassman to others to actually challenge our thinking to create the widest possible perspective. And that's not to give you a shopping list of things to do, but it's just to provide you an opportunity to think this thing through in half an hour. And what comes out of that is really a diverse perspective. And to be honest, if you take one thing away from what I'm talking about, or any one of us have talked about, and if there's only one person on this call who's taken one thing away, that's what good looks like. Furthermore, as well, we haven't really talked a great deal about winning thinking to date. So we're going to talk a bit more about winning thinking. We've talked a lot about the business technical side of restructuring, which we're actually, oddly enough, familiar with as well. But the real challenge in these situations is the ability to shift people's thinking to hit the target. So we'll talk a bit more about that today. But I think the greatest challenge that we should all be fearful of is actually not seeing the challenge. And that's really where my passion comes from in setting up this call. And from that perspective, the challenge is then how to close that gap and take the action to get things back on track. So the winning thinking approach we've had a unique experience, but I would, and the acid test of that is cash and immediate results, and that's our comfort zone. So we will touch on certain aspects of that, which frankly, if we didn't, it would be a bit negligent and a bit stupid, because really want to get you the most value out of this as possible. But the acid test of this is really results. It's about creating cash and, and also talk a bit about relationships today as well. So Mike Stewart isn't with us today, who's a member of the Winning Thinking team. So I'm doing the introduction. So you've got the pleasure of that from me today. That's the introduction out of the way. And I'd like to introduce you again to David McLean, who comes from a completely different background, from a military background with the Royal Marines. So he's formed his thinking from a different perspective. And the great David Allen is joining us as well from a different perspective once again. Has been really very influential for a long period of time in the US and UK tech startup scene. So without further ado, I'll just kick off my talk, then I'll hand over to David and hand over to David, both the Davids. If at any moment in time you want to raise any questions, please do. But I'd also like to say thank you very much for joining this call. Very much appreciate this. There's been some really good feedback that's been really helped us to steer our thinking in terms of other people's perspectives of whether or not people are taking action, whether or not actions align. So it's been great from our side. So that's the introduction out of the way. So I think in summary, one of the biggest challenge we face with the COVID challenge is how little we know overall, and how reliant we are on teams. And this actually, I was doing some work with a guy called Ollie Phillips, who's the Rugby Sevens captain, just last week. And we came to the conclusion that actually imposter syndrome is actually the place to be for leaders it's actually the most honest place for leaders to be. And I'd use an analogy. It's a bit like a windsurfer. Whenever I windsurfed, I never really got into windsurfing, but I was very good at going in one direction and not at all good at coming back. And I think the wind has been behind a lot of businesses for a long period of time. And actually, a lot of the relationships actually haven't been tested. And I think when you look at a lot of the change, the volume has been turned up and down. Some businesses are doing well and some businesses are dropping. And there's some in between which might need restructuring. But actually out of that, there's not much fundamental change going on, which really concerns me. The other side of that as well is that during this period of time, things have been too easy. So relationships haven't been as strong as they might have been. And from a purely practical perspective, there's lots of evidence to suggest that most thoughts that come into people's heads are actually wrong. So the minute we open our mouth, and certainly my experience as a leader, being involved in difficult situations, whenever I open my mouth and think I know better, I 9 times out of 10 find I get it wrong, even though I've got a fair amount of experience. So Just to provide some context here, we're in a really serious situation, and this is my main concern. So there are 10 million jobs in the UK being subsidised right at this moment in time. And one of the main concerns with that is actually when that's removed, what does that look like? And both in the US and the UK, there's roughly 25% being taken out of the economy. And what does that leave? It leaves a lot of businesses which are very unlikely to restart from where they were. Because with that type of situation, it's almost impossible. In fact, this, from a turnaround technical perspective, is the most difficult turnaround. So this provides a vital window where we've got cash, and we've also got some restructuring tools which the government have provided, which must be used. So some of the headlines that have come out from our venerable speakers that we've had contribute to this is a very strong flavour of community and valuing local relationships, as well as autonomy. I think, through the remote working, people have had more autonomy than they've had before. There's been more localization. There's more of a focus on localization, both in retail and manufacturing, and also education, which is what Lord Glassman talked about, more of a move back to the polytechnics. And there's also this focus, which I think is being challenged, which is people looking for more and more digital proof. When in fact, to be honest, people know what's right or wrong. A lot of people saying, well, I need the data. Well, actually, no, it's obvious. There's also a fear of speaking out around digital escalation, which is part of the challenge with the US falling apart at the moment. So there's a dynamic there which we can maybe talk about in the questions. The other thing is there's funding's been stopped, which, to be honest, I'm quite pleased about, because this then means that businesses, the main sanity check of any business is, does it make profit? And I think that's a very healthy challenge. And a lot of tech businesses which have started, which would never make any money and just burning cash, and actually doing quite a lot of damage to the markets they serve. Furthermore, there's some difficult things to talk about. For example, China, which need to be talked about, and there's very few people talking about that. There's been an effort to develop some sycophantic type approaches in this situation. And I think there's also some anti-competitive aspects, which competitive legislation came about because you had dominant players charging too much money. Now you've got something far worse, which is dominant players charging far less money, which is really squeezing markets. And you've got companies like Amazon who are really driving that and through their intermediator of sales. So the challenge is, how did we get here? So this is not something new. This has been going for the last 40 years or so, pretty much since the 1970s. I think there's been a shift from business being based on profit and relationships to growth and domination. And this, actually, oddly enough, whilst anybody talks about more or growth, it sounds it's so normal, it's so normalized, but actually it came about in the 1970s. And also education is all about self-reliance, which is the antithesis of what I started off talking about, which is leaders, being comfortable with imposter syndrome. I think as well, when it comes to tech, we've been caught in this loss-making scheme where a lot of these tech businesses, which are not making money, have got caught in this sort of Ponzi investment cycle, fueling these businesses, which I'm quite pleased has been cut short. And the outcome, why is this wrong? Actually, there's a lot of rework going on, and if you just look at it at the top level, it's totally unsustainable. In fact, the bigger problem is not COVID-19. In fact, COVID-19 is not the problem here at all. It's just shone a light on this. The bigger problem is, in fact, sustainability underlying this. So just to shine a light in terms of some of the ways of approaching this, people know what is right. Okay, fundamentally, we're very good at knowing what's right. I think what's happened over a period of time, that people have been forced to do things which have not been right, and it's bent them out of shape. And so a lot of the answer in company turnaround is actually handing the ownership back to people to let them do things in their own way. And what that does, interestingly enough, is it then realigns your actions and your beliefs, and it gives you your heart back in what you're doing. And it's a bit like just speaking something out without really feeling it. Are you passionate? Are you going to work because you really care? Or are you just going through the motions? And certainly in my career, I went through motions for quite some time until I started doing what I'm doing now. So I think the other side of this is also letting people make decisions. So they know what's right or wrong, let them make decisions. And I think the most accurate perspective of a leader in that is actually to accept that they don't know. And the acid test of all of this is profit. Is the business making any profit? So the other question here is also what drives us. So some of these things we're not familiar with. So how did we get to where we've got to? And one of the challenges which might help you in terms of if you're running a business is just consider what were the challenges you faced and what were the actions you take, and you get some insight into that. So how do you put this thing back together? The challenge is to reset the paradigms, and these are really, it's almost like the best analogy is a tank with a bent gun. It's sort of bending around a corner, so the chance of hitting the target is very slim. Apart from going up and down in volume, really not fixing the fundamental paradigms, which are things like self-reliance in the education system and more. The other paradigms is around people. So the word love in businesses, oddly enough, is something that's becoming more predominant, but that's really around what does that mean in business, putting other people's first. And practically some of the mantras and the blind spots are really critical. And part of the problem in the States is actually the fitting generalizations around racism, which is clearly an extraordinarily bad event, but actually it's the dynamic of that and how that fire is getting fueled and why no one can put it out. That's what concerns me in terms of the dynamic in the States. And the other part of this is also the core business. So what is difficult to replicate, and as David Allen rightly says, the Revolut is almost a debit card business, and it's hardly a compelling proposition. And that's the source of profit. So a lot of businesses really should, if they have no compelling proposition, they really should be challenged very hard. So I'm pleased to see that. There has to be a triage of businesses throughout this process that are not going to survive. So the challenge with this is, using Mike Stewart's words, what are the spectacles we need to see this, to read this new now? Many of the things, I think, the cold light of day are stupid. So fundamentally, a lot of the tech initiatives are stupid. A lot of the mantras around the big numbers and the small numbers in people's networks, I think, it's created a lot of noise, which is utterly wasteful. I think one of the things we've learned is that actually there's a reset of relationships going on, and it's about managing that smaller number. It's also about taking your own actions and doing what's right and aligning your expectations. So when you do this, you actually create grit. You avoid labeling things. You take time to understand others. You let them be themselves. You make them feel like they belong. You let them speak up. Individuals speaking up against wrong things is where it starts. Organizations do not do that. Solzhenitsyn was a good example of that in terms of speaking out. And it's about overcoming fear. It's actually overcoming fear in a purely practical perspective is about taking action. So throughout this whole process, I'm really concerned that not enough organizations are taking enough action. They might be thinking, but not taking action is deadly. So, and also where are the points in this process whereby people need to say, stop, we need to think about this doesn't look right. So what are those prompts? And I think out of that, what you're actually doing, if you're allowing people to make decisions, you're actually defining certainty. So whilst I said in the first place, the best place is for leaders not to know what to do, actually at individual level, we're beginning to paint this picture, allowing people to make their own decisions, implement their own actions. And then we've got a means of checking that. So we've got reviews, not just reviews like this or broader reviews or team reviews. You've also got reviews and checking ideas to make sure that's sane. And that frequency of reviews, I think a lot of critical situations should be on a daily basis. So the challenge is also when you're moving from A to B, you're not tiring out the team. So how do you build the capability? And that's really around experiential learning. It's about letting people do their own thing and experiencing that, good or bad. And what this creates is ultimate speed. Because if you think about it, there's nothing worse than David Allen trying to be somebody else. And if you let, in fact, any one of us, so that is the most costly exercise. To trying to fit people into values or fit people into boxes is a very costly exercise. And so what this gives rise to is profit and cash, right? Because you're beginning to sell your core business because you put your prices up, which is a tough call. You need to find the courage to do that. But also you launch products quicker. You get work out the door, you invoice more stuff, and that creates cash. And that's the only thing that doesn't frankly bullshit in a company turnaround. Cash is the acid test. It's far more powerful than even profit. Profit can be obfuscated. So in a nutshell, what I'd like to say is it's critical that people are being trained through this process to straighten out the tank gun and hit the right target. There's some tough calls in here. The paradigms need to be shifted. frankly, I don't know how you're going to do that without support. We have got a solution. I'm not, but this is the concern. This is your challenge. How are you going to reset this whole thing to hit the target? And then it's about start doing these things. And actually, I think, interesting enough, people are talking about big and clever speed. I think the problem where things have got completely out of control and unstable is because we've been taking far too many of the wrong actions. And guess what? Things are moving at some rate of knots. But I think when we start getting this right again, things will become more stable. And out of all of this, guys, got to take action today. So I think no one ever does anything tomorrow. Quoting a Greek waiter type leadership style. But no, I think it's all about taking action today. And when you take action today, you begin to align yourself with your passion, and your heart comes into what you're doing, and it reduces your stress dramatically. So that I think is the essence of the talks that we've had to date. I've probably missed some things, so forgive me. David Allen would probably, I hope, pick me up on a few bits in his summary at the end. But
got that right.
Yeah, so good. So over to you, David McLean, to share your thoughts on the people side, and or if there's any question you'd like to ask, or you're welcome.
Sure, no, thank you. Yeah, and thanks very much for that, Tom. I appreciate that. And what I'd like to just add as well, as we start, is former Royal Marine, absolutely. However, less 8 years ago, I can't believe it's that long now. And I've been a psychotherapist, senior psychotherapist, which is why obviously I'm on here and part of the Winning Thinking team to talk about people. As I have some expertise in that in terms of people and people within business, of course. And Tom's gave us a lot of information there, a lot of important information. And what I want to do just in the next few minutes, 5 minutes or so, is simplify it from a people point of view. Is really kind of boil it down a little bit to try and make it as simple as we can for simple steps that we can take as individuals to be able to make a difference within the groups, within the teams, within the businesses that we run and own and are part of. Quite simply, what is it that I've learned, or what is it that I feel that we as a collective, that I've learned over the last 10 sessions, that people can adapt reasonably well, actually. People can adapt quite well in certain circumstances. However, there's that change, or recognising that change is a painful or a difficult thing to do. And it can sometimes be quite a struggle. Now, there's many elements, of course, that people have enjoyed in this change. If you're furloughed and you're on full pay and you've been sunbathing for 2 months, then that's absolutely fine. But of course, if your job is in some sort of danger, or your business is, then it's a whole different place. One of the clients that we're working with at the moment, she's a senior manager in an insurance business. And she has told me that she doesn't want to have this 3-hour round trip commuting into London anymore. And I can see that, obviously, and it's quite obvious to all of us. So there is changes that have happened. Some of them have been forced on us, or most of them have been forced on us, but actually there's a lot of them that now we're over that change is difficult or painful aspect, that people are now working from home if they're mainly sitting in call centres or whatever it is that they're doing. Actually, once we're there, and there's a lot of changes and things that are actually better overall. So what is this saying? That big fundamental changes actually are simple, or relatively simple, and by that I mean in a 2 to 3 month period. But there's a few things that we need to recognise to be able to bring this awareness to a point that we're able to change and be able to bridge that gap as an individual, so that we can bridge that gap and change from that fear place that some people are in at the moment to courage, in other words, decision making, and from no action to action. Now, we don't know what we don't know, do we? And that's a funny statement, I think, because it's not really that helpful. It's not that helpful to me, because we don't know it, we don't know what to do. So what is it that we have to do as individuals in this call or anywhere else? Well, we need to be open to new ideas. We need to be able to have that ability, that awareness that things could and should be different in many cases. The Buddhists will say a beginner's mind. It's something that I work off. It's something that recognising that the things you've been doing for years, the business you've been running for 20 years, that actually in the place that we're sitting at the moment and the levels of fear and anxiety, then just going back to the basics of it and actually looking what it is and looking at things with a beginner's mind to see, where can I change? Let's grow an awareness of this position, this situation that we're in, and look at things from an objective point of view, of course, instead of a subjective point of view, trying to get outside of the problem and looking at it in that way. And there's no doubt at all that the pandemic has increased anxiety as a whole. Now, there's, as I say, the people who are safe jobs, who've been sunbathing for 2 months, of course, their anxiety might not be quite as high as the people who have lost their job or whatever it may well be. But there's no doubt about it that we must realise that the people that are on this call, are not immune to it. None of us are. I'm not, and I know what I'm talking about. None of us are at all. So it's something to recognise that, and it's also quite good. Because when our ego gets in the way of how we're feeling and why we should be doing this, and I'm an upstanding member of the community. I've been in this sector for 30 years, and I should be able to sort this out myself. All these different things. Remember, this fear response and actions that we're having is a very natural evolutionary response, and it's nothing to do with intelligence at all. So, giving yourself a bit of a break in that sense as well from that fight-flight response that we have. So what is it that we do about it? Well, we stop and think, and most people confuse thinking with mental activity. There's very, very few people that think constantly, and we talk about the great thinkers. We need to recognise that thinking is cannot be confused with mental activity, and that the majority of what we do is habitual behaviour, habitual thinking that happens automatically in our brain. So really taking the time, which uses energy, blood glucose, which is why we don't do it, because the brain wants to conserve energy, but sitting down and really thinking and getting other people, of course, to help you that's in that space or knows different areas to help you in an objective view of things. That is a tremendously important thing to be able to do. Thoughts create feelings, feelings create actions, and actions produce results. That's one of my favourite sayings that I talk about often. Thoughts, thinking is not as easy as we think it is, and it's not something that we often do, but our thoughts create the chemicals in ourselves that allow us to feel in a particular way, which hopefully will be confidence, which will be courage, and allow us to make the decisions that we need to make to save our job, to save our business, to whatever it may well be, so that we can get through on the other side of this. The final point I would just make as well, in terms of something that's often overlooked, is the 3 Ps: positive thinking, positive interaction, and physical activity. That is tremendously important in terms of what we do. It's a very evolutionary thing. We've been doing it for a couple 100,000 years in this form, and we could argue 1.5 million years in terms of the interaction from the cavemen, women days, etc. And that exercise, it really is underestimated. And that is what allows us to ultimately, without going into it for another half an hour lecture, allows people to raise into the higher regions of the brain and be able to do what they need to do. And make the decisions, have the confidence and the coping mechanisms, creating the serotonin, endorphins, etc., dopamine, to have the coping mechanisms to deal with whatever is going on at the moment and be able to get above it and make the decisions that you need to. That's me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. One question: I don't know if you agree with my hypothesis that, how do we build grit? So if this is a difficult challenge, let's say, then how can people build grit and/or the ability to really stick at this and see this through? My hypothesis is for people to take their own action. That's what I've noticed. What's your, in a sort of 10 seconds or so, what's your view? Do you agree with that, or what would you say?
Absolutely, yeah, action's absolutely right, but it needs to be aligned action. And of course, so when you're doing things out of fear, it might be enough to get you where you need to be. It might be enough to pay the mortgage this month or whatever it is. But the alignment is key, and that takes a little bit of time. So fight the fires that you need to fight. Fight off the nearest crocodiles, whatever it may well be. But recognise that change and momentum, gathering momentum and motivation, it does take a bit of time. So it's something that these things that we want to do is to put into place so that by next month you are where you need to be. So we fight the fires we need to fight, do whatever you need to do, but make the changes, the positive thinking, etc., not negative thinking, of course, physical activity, and the other points that I've mentioned, and see it as not the long game, but a slightly longer game.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's great. Fantastic. So if you could just pick up the questions, I've seen some nasty questions come through, so I'll leave those to you, David. So over to you, David Allen, to share your thoughts and your summary, and then we'll come back to the questions after you.
Well, I think we've got to strike two words out of our vocabulary. The first one is difficult, because people are talking about difficult, and challenge. The simple truth is, okay, we're in a really difficult time. We're not really. I mean, if you look at the components of what we're seeing here, have we ever seen declining sales? Yes, we've seen declining sales before. Have we ever seen cost structures go completely up in smoke? Yeah, we've seen those before. Have we ever seen changes in demand? Absolutely, seen all those things. So what haven't we seen before? Well, what we haven't seen before, we haven't seen, well, first of all, what I call timing. We haven't seen all these things occur at the same time. So that's made it a little difficult or challenging. But we really have got to find a way to strike those two words out, because if you use the words difficult and challenging, you start legitimizing in your own brain, in your own thinking, that, well, things really are difficult. Of course we're going to fail. Everybody's failing. Of course we're going to fail. So I think that the one thing the first thing we haven't seen before is all these things happening at the same time. I was talking with Tom a little bit before we started. I'm like way older than all you guys. At least I hope I am. I was born 9 years after World War II. And we were talking about what I've seen. The only time I've seen this sort of political violence and rioting in the U.S. was at the end of the Vietnam War in 1970. Well, it ended in 75. But when I particularly became available for the draft in 1971, the place was bonkers. There were whole cities being burned down. And guess what? Right now, there's whole cities being burned down. The second thing we haven't seen before is we haven't ever seen global government interference in our lives. Every government globally, whether it's a communist, quote unquote, or a socialist or democratic government, has gone into lockdown. There's a word being used everywhere around the world in every language called lockdown. And that's never happened before. So we've never seen the government step in and say, didn't matter who and what. And the third thing we've not seen before, it's been building a long time, but we've not seen the impact of video and live video shaping the opinion of the world. And it really has shaped a great amount of what's going on. Of course, seeing a cop sit on a guy's neck for 9 minutes and killing him on live TV from 9 separate viewpoints, that compels a bunch of action. And surprise, surprise, if you were in America, you'd see all that action. But just to pick up on a couple of things, Tom, you said about community and relationships, I really liked back in the talk that Mike Weirs talked about, going guerrilla hunting when we're not prepared for guerrilla hunting. We're all doing things that we, under the old thinking, haven't been prepared to do, because we've got two things that I've talked about in the past. One, we've got assumptions about how the world works, and then that has led to us having presumptions about how this particular business should work. So, and the truth is, if I look at, back to Mike's company, Fabicus, and what they're doing, the technology world takes time to develop. You can't just have a bright idea and say, oh, that's a really good idea, let's go out and do that. And, by Saturday, you have the whole product and everything's running. It can take anywhere from 9 months to 3 years to build something. And, there's no technology we're using right now, whether it's mobile phones or Apple Watches or the whole internet or anything else, that if you had interrupted the development cycle of any of those technologies with an event like what's going on right now, they wouldn't exist. If this had happened to Apple in 2006, the iPhone wouldn't exist, because it would have been blown out, based on higher priorities. I mean, even if you took a look at Microsoft and their operating system, and if you scale everything back to 1977 or 78 when Bill Gates and co were, in New Mexico programming and doing stuff, if something like that had happened, Bill probably would have gone back to Seattle or re-enrolled in Harvard or, something like that. And that wouldn't have happened. We would have a fundamentally different world from what we're living in. So the issue is, what are we going to do about it? And, stop moaning about how difficult it is and how challenging it is. It's challenging for everybody. It's difficult for everybody. There's an old saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. Does, and a falling tide falls all boats. Okay, so maybe we're in a falling tide, and all the boats are falling, but not all the boats are going to fall. And the ones who aren't going to fall are the ones that stop using the word difficult, stop using the words challenging, and look at, hey, what do I need to do to get out of this? So I think that there's some great opportunities, and this has brought in what you were saying, Tom, the whole issue of relationships and business and the love and feeling the love. I've never experienced worse customer service in my whole life than the last 2 months. And people start giving crap customer service just because they can. There's for most of the businesses out there in terms of their customer service opportunities, there's absolutely no reason for the crap customer service that they're delivering. And some companies, however, are going to stand up through that and do a really, really good job. And those guys are going to shine. And so I think that we do have to look at what drives us, and that's a really good comment, Tom. We're in a world that isn't good. There's some components of this world that aren't going to change. The social distancing thing isn't going to change. I really like the creative idea that Virgin came up with. So if you get on a plane in Virgin, you get to sit in a seat. You notice this gigantic box in the seat next to you. Well, that's cargo. So they've said, okay, so we can't have people in seats. We'll put cargo in seats, and crack on and carry on. And so it's that type of thing. People like, if you got to fly a plane from here to New York, one of these big passenger planes, it's going to cost you $250,000 in fuel to go there. So you got to say, are we just going to stop going, and then let people swim? That's probably not working. Or cruise ships, that's even worse. So what's going to happen? It's going to be the people who say, okay, well, we can do this. We can't do that. We'll do this. And so I think that what we're accomplishing here, bringing a bunch of ideas to the fore, and I'm really glad for the people who've come along to talk and contribute, because I think it's been a great thing. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, fantastic, David. That's articulate and amusing all at the same time. It's always good value. So if you just give a rating in terms of your point about normalizing challenge and the difficulty is absolutely brilliant, like that. So well done for picking me up on my words. 10 out of 10 for that. In terms of people's awareness, to use a different word, and or alignment to the challenge, what do you give a sort of number out of 10 in terms of how you see people's awareness practically, and their ability to adjust at the moment? Sort of 2 numbers out of 10.
Well, I mean, in terms of people's awareness, how could you not be aware? I mean, you go out in the street here in Surrey, and you get a good chance if you're loitering about, you'll get arrested, or at least were until last week. And same thing in London. I mean, it was the same problem there. So awareness that there is an issue. Obviously, you'd have to be either on drugs or in a coma not to see that there's an issue. I do think that one of the things you said in the beginning is a lot of people just don't understand what the issue is. And if the issue is there going to be upheaval there always is upheaval. Not on this scale. We haven't ever seen anything on this scale. But in terms of major upheaval, if you look back in history, the Great Depression was exactly 100 years ago in the U.S. Well, it was global. And the biggest industries that could happen came out of that. Because some people said, hey, it's difficult, so I might as well lay down. No, some people said, well, it probably is difficult, but so what? I don't give a shit. We're going to crack on.
Yeah. Great. Fantastic. So thanks for that, David. It's very clear. David McLean, what sort of questions have you got, please? What have you got?
Yes. So the first one is from Leslie Nutman. Sorry. Thank you, Leslie. Is the way forward innovation and entrepreneurial leadership as described by the economist Joseph A. Schumpeter, if I'm pronouncing that correct? I don't know if anyone would like to.
Well, I think it depends what you mean by that. I think that the way forwards is really to align the activities in the organisation with the challenge and remove any obstacles from doing that. And if that involves innovation and or technology, then so be it. But I think that there's been a focus on, in terms of mantras, there's been a focus on technology is the answer to everything. We need more data, when in fact it's simply not true. So I think there's, it's just a question of getting perspective. And I think, Les, as well, to a degree, getting back to basics, because a lot of this stuff is about the well-being of people to actually see and face the challenge and stick the hand up. So there's some underlying drivers there, I think, which help keep the business on track. So I think that my personal view is that whatever helps keep the actions and the challenge aligned, I think, is the critical thing to focus on.
Thank you. And question from Nick Brown: what would be the top 3 questions leaders and team members should be asking themselves?
You mean me?
Yeah, it's one for you, David. Easy one.
Actually, this was a question from Mike Weirs, where he said the massive interruption to the, quote, way of life we've enjoyed is a tough thing to swallow, but it isn't going away. So those that adapt the fastest and not await the return of what we had have learned to live like is an opportunity that will favor those that can do it quicker and better. So I think the 2 words are quicker and better. That are absolutely an awesome thing. I've said several times that one of my former American friends said, it was a little guy named Henry Ford, and they asked him, why don't you ever ask your customers about what you want? And he said, if I ask my customers what they want, they'd say faster horses. People don't want to change. So, we could say the GDP was up here and it's gone down by 40%. Okay, the GDP was up here and GDP is now down here. Down here, by the way, that's where we are. If you're thinking it's going to go back up to 40%, you're either smoking dope or you're insane, because it isn't going. And people suddenly have found out, I don't need this many cars, I don't need this many clothes, I don't need to go on holiday. Amazing. The British public will not be able to go to Spain and Greece this summer. How will they live? Oh my God, what should we do? And then they go, well, actually, life's okay, really. But I do think Mike made another point that navigating this requires leadership at the executive and personal level that's way more important now than has ever been in the past. So, to a lot of things that David McLean's been talking about in terms of personal integrity and all that, that's like way bigger an issue now.
Yeah. I think I'll just add one thing to that, which is to understand how you've got to where you've got to. So I mentioned this thing about the challenge and the actions that are taken. I'll give you one practical example. There's a tiling business, when I very first started my turnaround career, who had moved into retail. And the reason why they moved into retail was because there was another competitor that came into the marketplace. And that is not fixing the problem. And that's the reason why businesses go bust, when they take their eye off the ball and they move away from the core business.
They fix the wrong problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
we're working on the wrong problem.
100%. So, and I think it's a question of understanding. That's the thinking in the organisation. And if you look back through the last 3 to 5 years, the question I always understand: how do we get to where we've got to? What was the thinking that you've got you to where you've got to? Then you know the problem to fix. And if you look at the government initiatives, that's deadly at the moment. So these are all fixing the wrong problem. They're providing a window of time, but it's positioned in completely the wrong way. So it actually creates exactly this opposite behaviours that David Allen was suggesting in terms of
the interesting
being able to action it.
Interesting about what the government's doing right now. We better absolutely pray that there's not another COVID, because we couldn't do this twice. Okay, we're printing money to do this. And so is the US. I mean, every country in the West is doing the same thing, just basically printing money, issuing bonds, and doing all sorts of things that, by the way, nobody can buy because they have no cash to do it with.
Yeah.
This one can't happen twice.
No.
The UK couldn't afford it. I mean, Donald Trump has given out $1,200 to every American. I haven't gotten mine yet, but there we go. But if we have another one, he can't give out 1,200 more pounds or dollars to everybody. It just can't happen. It's not that much money left.
100%, yeah. Yeah. What else, David? What else?
Yes, good question from Steve Brown. Are there any specific approaches, frameworks, or models you would recommend applying to navigate the way forward from the current climate?
100%, but I'd be selling if I told you the answer. 100% got the answer to that question. Give me a call. If you want, seriously, if you want to sort this out in a day, I can sort it out in a day with your executive team. No bullshit.
Perfect. And a question from Charles Hayne. At the pub on the 14th of April, some 7 weeks ago, you said, I'm not sure who the you was, you said reputations will be won and lost during COVID-19. Outside of politics, where we're drowning examples, have you seen any outstanding leadership stances and standout messaging from companies or execs?
I think Jacinda Ardern in the New Zealand Prime Minister's exceptionally good. I think she has got an exceptionally pragmatic perspective, exceptionally honest, straightforward, vulnerable perspective and humility to her that is personally endearing, develops the right type of behaviours within her team, and actually I think hits the target. So I think she's pretty damn good.
Okay. And finally, it's just a comment, actually, but I think it's a good point to end on before David sums up. From Steve Brown again, a recent quote that seems apt: "The entire sea of water can't sink a ship unless it gets inside the ship. Similarly, the negativity of the world can't put you down unless you allow it to get inside you." Good point.
Yeah, I think that's all about taking action. So I think on a daily basis, we've got to be doing what David Allen's saying every day, and we've got to challenge it. I mean, my only claim to fame is I've never done the same day's work twice. Apart from the lockdown, I've always gone for a bike ride because I live in a nice part of the world before this call. But I've never done the same day's work twice. So I'd encourage us, we have to take action today, guys, and get used to taking new action all the time. I listen to this stuff that comes out of this call. I take it on the chin. We record it. There's things we can learn from and change every day. In fact, David Allen was the guy that challenged the basis of this call. And look what's happened. He's joined us. He's gone from being.
I've gone to the dark side.
Yeah, he's gone from poacher to gamekeeper. So that's the challenge, for us to change our actions and try to get things right. But I think the other thing is, unless you try, you don't know. So we sat around for a long period of time. We could have not launched this call at all. But I hope people have taken positive things out of this. But we could have given up very easily, but we haven't, and we won't.
That's us. That's it. A few other comments, but that's all the questions.
So, David Allen, in a couple of sentences, what's your thoughts in terms of what?
I think, in summary, very quickly, the one thing I do like is we have a group of people, both on the call and people who are attending in, if you will, who are no bullshit. The one thing that is great about this whole thing is it's cut the bullshit factor out completely. You either got a solution or shut up and sit down. That really is what has happened in the world we live in. You either have a solution or you don't. So if you have a solution, stand up If not, sit down and shut up. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing that binds us and everybody who's watching on this call is they're after solutions, after solutions. It turns out there are 4 or 5 things you need to do. And, you know, those are worth taking a look at. But I do think all of them start with leadership. They start with us. They start with our thinking. They start with our programming. They start with our willingness to get rid of difficult and challenge and focus on how do we get there. Anyway, my thoughts, my summary.
Fantastic. That's great, David. Thank you very much. And I hope the rest of the attendees have enjoyed this uncut. We'll do the editing later. But you've had the privilege of we'll edit that bit out, David, I think, but it was a bit too straightforward. No, I think not. So I hope, guys, sincerely you've taken something away from this. And thank you very much for joining us. And I'd also encourage you, I mean, I hate saying this, but if you found this useful, please share it with other people. And/or this is not a numbers game as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, if you take away one thing away from this, that's great, and from one person. But if you do find this helpful, then please let's do something useful. Let's do what we can to raise the awareness and take some action. So that's all. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. See you.